Welcome to Empire Speedrun. Today we're exploring one of the most influential empires in history, the Roman Empire. From a small settlement on the banks of the Tiber River, Rome grew into a sprawling empire that shaped law, politics, architecture, and culture for millennia. But how did it begin? Let's start at the very beginning, with myth, legend, and early history. Roman tradition says the city was founded in 753 BC by twin brothers Romulus and Remus. According to the legend, the twins were abandoned as infants and rescued by a she-wolf who nursed them. Raised by a shepherd, they grew strong and eventually decided to build a city together. However, a dispute over where to found the city led Romulus to kill Remus. Romulus then became the first king of Rome, naming the city after himself. While this story is almost certainly myth, it reflects Roman values: strength, survival against the odds, and the importance of destiny and leadership. The tale was part of Rome's identity, used to inspire unity and pride. Historically, Rome began as a cluster of small villages on the Palatine Hill near the Tiber River. This location was strategic, near trade routes, fertile lands, and easy to defend. Rome's earliest inhabitants were Latin tribes, but their culture was heavily influenced by the Etruscans, a sophisticated civilization to the north. The Etruscans introduced advanced engineering techniques, religious practices, and urban planning to the fledgling city. Rome was initially ruled by kings, with the monarchy lasting about 2.5 centuries. These kings, some Etruscan, helped establish important institutions such as the Roman Senate and early legal codes. However, the monarchy was not without problems. The last king, Tarquin the Proud, became infamous for his tyranny. His abuse of power led to his overthrow in 509 BC by a coalition of Roman nobles and commoners. The expulsion of the king marked the beginning of the Roman Republic, a new political system designed to prevent any single person from holding too much power. The Republic was governed by elected magistrates, such as consuls who served limited terms. The Senate, originally an advisory body of elder patricians, gained significant influence over policy and governance. However, Roman society was sharply divided between the patricians and the plebeians, the common people. Early on, political rights were mostly reserved for patricians, creating tensions that led to the conflict of the orders. Over time, plebeians fought for and gained political representation. The office of tribunes of the plebs was created to protect commoners' interests, and legal reforms gradually made Rome's political system more inclusive. The early republic faced constant threats from neighboring tribes and cities in Italy. To survive, Rome built a strong military tradition based on citizen soldiers who owned land and fought to defend it. The Roman army's discipline, organization, and adaptability helped Rome gradually conquer and absorb other Latin peoples and Etruscan cities. By the 4th century BC, Rome dominated much of central Italy. During this time, Rome also developed its legal system and expanded its infrastructure. Roads, aqueducts, and forums were built to support growing urban populations and trade. After the early republic stabilized, Rome began expanding its influence across the Italian peninsula. Some of this was done through warfare, but much of it was achieved through a strategic mix of alliances, colonization, and road building. By the early 3rd century BC, Rome had subdued or allied with nearly every major group in Italy, from the Etruscans in the north to the Samnites and Greek colonies in the south. The famous Via Appia, or major Roman road, connected the city to its southern territories and symbolized Rome's growing integration of Italy. Rome's success wasn't just military. They were masters at offering defeated enemies partial citizenship or favorable treaties, tying them into the Roman system while still keeping ultimate control. This web of alliances created a unified Italian force that would soon take on much bigger enemies. The First Punic War, 264 to 241 BC. Rome's next challenge wasn't on land, it was at sea. Across the Mediterranean, on the island of Sicily, Rome's interests clashed with those of Carthage, a wealthy, powerful city-state in North Africa. Carthage was a naval superpower, and Rome, at this point, had virtually no navy. But that didn't stop them. Rome built a fleet from scratch, reportedly reverse engineering a captured Carthaginian ship. They added a boarding device called the corvus, turning sea battles into land-style skirmishes, playing to Roman strengths. After more than 2 decades of brutal back-and-forth fighting, Rome emerged victorious. The First Punic War ended with Carthage ceding Sicily, and Rome gaining its first overseas province. The Second Punic War, 218 to 201 BC. Carthage wasn't finished. Enter Hannibal, one of history's greatest military commanders. Hannibal launched a bold surprise attack by crossing the Alps with an army that included elephants. Despite heavy losses during the crossing, he won several stunning victories in Italy, including the massive Battle of Cannae in 216 BC, where he annihilated a Roman army. Rome was shaken, but not broken. Rather than confronting Hannibal directly for years, Rome waged a war of attrition. They cut off Carthaginian supply lines, fought his allies in Spain, and eventually invaded North Africa. This forced Hannibal to return home, where he was finally defeated by Scipio Africanus at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC. The Second Punic War left Carthage weakened and Rome as the dominant power in the Western Mediterranean. The Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BC. Years later, Rome, no longer feeling charitable, decided Carthage should be gone for good. The Third Punic War was short and brutal. Rome laid siege to Carthage, eventually breaking through its walls. The city was destroyed, its population enslaved, and its land supposedly salted, though the salting part is probably a myth. With Carthage gone, Rome annexed its territory and became an empire in more than one name, controlling lands across North Africa, Spain, and the islands of the Western Mediterranean. While Rome was at war with Carthage, it also began expanding eastward. The Macedonian Wars brought Rome into conflict with Hellenistic kingdoms like Macedon and the Seleucid Empire, the remnants of Alexander the Great's empire. These wars culminated in decisive Roman victories and new provinces in Greece and Asia Minor. By the mid-2nd century BC, Rome was no longer just an Italian or Western Mediterranean power. It had become a global superpower by ancient standards. But with great conquest came great instability. The massive influx of wealth from conquered lands created enormous social gaps in Rome. Aristocrats bought up land and used cheap slave labor, while small farmers, the backbone of the Republic, were squeezed out. Many displaced citizens flooded into the cities, especially Rome, creating an underclass dependent on government handouts. Meanwhile, generals and politicians competed for power, often using their armies as personal tools rather than servants of the state. One of the earliest attempts to address these problems came from the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, 2 tribunes who pushed for land reforms and grain subsidies. They argued that Rome's wealth should be shared more fairly and that citizenship should be extended to Rome's Italian allies. Their ideas were popular with the common people, but that made them enemies of the Senate. Tiberius was killed in a political riot in 133 BC. A decade later, Gaius met a similar fate. The deaths of the Gracchi signaled that political violence was now a tool in Roman politics, and once that door opened, it would be hard to close. Rome's military also began to change. Traditionally, only landowners could serve in the legions, but as small farms disappeared, fewer citizens qualified. In 107 BC, a general named Gaius Marius reformed the army, allowing landless citizens to enlist. In return, they would be rewarded with land after their service. This made the military more professional, but it also meant soldiers were loyal to their generals, not the state. Ambitious leaders could now raise private armies, setting the stage for civil war. By the end of the 2nd century BC, Rome was a republic in name, but increasingly an oligarchy strained by inequality, corruption, and militarization. Foreign wars brought power and glory, but also social division and instability. The Senate resisted reform, popular leaders turned to violence, and generals turned into political strongmen. The Republic had conquered the known world, but couldn't govern itself, and still, the worst was yet to come. By the early 1st century BC, the Roman Republic was showing deep cracks. Political violence had become routine. Senate's corruption was rampant. Populist leaders clashed with the aristocratic elite, and generals were more powerful than the government itself. Into this chaos stepped two key figures, Gaius Marius and his rival, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, both ambitious generals with loyal armies and personal agendas. In 88 BC, Sulla was appointed to lead a campaign against Mithridates, king of Pontus in Asia Minor. But the Senate, under pressure from Marius and the Populares, the populist faction, resigned the command. Sulla didn't take this well. He did something no Roman had ever done before. He marched on Rome with his army. This shocking act set a dangerous precedent, using force to settle political disputes. Sulla seized the city, crushed opposition, and eventually became dictator. But his version of dictator was different. It was legally sanctioned, but he ruled with an iron grip. Sulla carried out proscriptions, public hit lists of enemies of the state, and executed or exiled many of his rivals. He also restructured the Republic to favor the Senate, and limits the power of the tribunes. Then, surprisingly, he retired, just walked away. But the damage was already done. From now on, power in Rome came at the point of the sword. After Sulla, a new generation of power-hungry leaders emerged. Chief among them were Pompey the Great, a successful general who had mopped up Sulla's enemies, and Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome, who made his fortune in property, silver mines, and buying burning buildings to sell back to the owners. Together, they dominated Roman politics, but both knew that to secure real influence, they needed public support. This led them to ally with a rising star, Gaius Julius Caesar. Born in 100 BC, Julius Caesar came from a patrician family, but not a wealthy one. He was charismatic, ambitious, and deeply connected to the Populares faction. Early on, he made a name for himself as a skilled orator, military commander, and political schemer. In 60 BC, Caesar formed an unofficial alliance with Pompey and Crassus, known as the First Triumvirate. This wasn't a formal institution, just three powerful men helping each other climb to the top. In 59 BC, Caesar was elected consul. He pushed through land reforms for Pompey's veterans and tax breaks for Crassus's allies. After this term, he secured a military command in Gaul, modern-day France, where he would build his legend. From 58 to 50 BC, Caesar led a brutal, brilliant conquest of the Gallic tribes. He wrote detailed commentaries on his campaigns, the Gallic Wars, which were part war report, part propaganda. These accounts made him a celebrity in Rome and painted him as a military genius. By the end of the campaign, Caesar had added vast territories to Rome, defeated powerful tribal leaders like Vercingetorix, and gained the loyalty of a seasoned, battle-hardened army. But back in Rome, things were changing. Crassus died during a failed campaign in the east, and Pompey, once Caesar's ally, grew weary of Caesar's rising power. The Senate, influenced by Pompey, ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome alone. Caesar refused. In 49 BC, Caesar led his army across the Rubicon River, the boundary between his province and Italy proper. By doing so, he committed treason, effectively declaring civil war. According to legend, he said, "Alea iacta est," the die is cast. Pompey and the Senate fled the city. What followed was several years of brutal civil war, stretching from Italy to Greece to Egypt. Caesar defeated Pompey's forces in battle after battle. At the Battle of Pharsalius in 48 BC, Pompey's army was crushed. Pompey fled to Egypt, only to be murdered by order of the Egyptian king. When Caesar arrived in Alexandria, he became entangled in a dynastic dispute and famously allied with Queen Cleopatra VII. Their relationship was personal and political. They would later have a child, Caesarion. Back in Rome, Caesar was showered with honors. He was named dictator multiple times, first for short periods, then eventually for life. He implemented major reforms, such as cancelling debts, reorganizing the calendar into the Julian calendar, the basis of our current one, expanding the Senate, and granting citizenship to many in the provinces. But his growing power made many nervous. Roman tradition feared monarchy, and to some, Caesar looked more like a king than a republican leader. On March 15th, 44 BC, the Ides of March, a group of senators led by Brutus and Cassius, assassinated Caesar in the Senate chamber, stabbing him 23 times. They believed they were saving the Republic. Instead, they had doomed it. Caesar's death created a power vacuum, and the chaos that followed would usher in the next and final phase of the Roman Republic. Enter Octavian. Caesar had named his 18-year-old great-nephew, Gaius Octavius, as his adopted son and heir. Most people didn't expect much from him. He was young, untested, and up against seasoned politicians like Mark Antony, Caesar's right-hand man. But Octavian was smart, ruthlessly smart. He built alliances, outmaneuvered his enemies, and eventually formed a second triumvirate with Antony and Lepidus to defeat Caesar's assassins. Brutus and Cassius were defeated at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC. But the alliance wouldn't last. Antony and Octavian soon turned on each other. Antony allied with Cleopatra in Egypt, combining their forces and even declaring Caesarion as Caesar's true heir. In Roman eyes, this was treason. In 31 BC, at the Battle of Actium, Octavian's fleet, led by the general Agrippa, defeated Antony and Cleopatra. The couple fled to Egypt, where they both died by suicide. Octavian was now the uncontested ruler of Rome. In 27 BC, Octavian offered to restore the Republic, but in reality, he kept ultimate control. The Senate gave him the title Augustus, meaning the revered one. Thus, the Republic officially ended, and the Roman Empire was born. It hadn't been overthrown in a single moment. It had crumbled from within, gradually replaced by a new form of rule that looked Roman on the outside, but was in truth monarchy in all but name. When Octavian became Augustus in 27 BC, he kept a rather low profile. He didn't call himself emperor, didn't wear a crown, and didn't abolish the Senate. Instead, he took on humble-sounding titles like princeps, first citizen. But make no mistake, Augustus held the real power. He controlled the army, managed the provinces, appointed key officials, and even decided the laws. It was essentially a monarchy disguised as a republic. But it worked. Augustus ruled for over 40 years. He stabilized the empire, ended the chaos of the civil wars, reformed the tax system, professionalized the army, launched building projects, and began the Pax Romana, a roughly 200-year period of relative peace and prosperity. Augustus's biggest problem was succession. He didn't have a son. so he tried to groom various male relatives to take over. However, most of them died or disappointed him. In the end, his stepson Tiberius became emperor. That kicked off the Julio-Claudian dynasty, a family line that gave us a mix of competent rulers, tyrants, and total wildcards. Tiberius was a skilled general and administrator, but lacked charisma. He eventually grew paranoid and reclusive, retreating to the island of Capri while Rome was run by his sinister advisor, Sejanus, not exactly beloved. Tiberius' grandnephew, Caligula, started out promising, generous, popular, and then descended into full-blown madness. He spent wildly, insulted the Senate, may or may not have declared war on Neptune, and is rumored to have made his horse a priest or senator. The sources disagree. He was assassinated after just 4 years. Caligula's uncle Claudius was found hiding behind a curtain after the assassination and was declared emperor by the Praetorian Guard. Despite being underestimated due to a speech impediment and a limp, he turned out to be effective. He expanded the empire into Britain, reformed the bureaucracy, and centralized imperial control. Then he was probably poisoned by his fourth wife, Agrippina the Younger, who wanted her son to take the throne. And take it he did. Nero, the last Julio-Claudian, started out okay under the guidance of advisors like Seneca, but once he was fully in charge, things got theatrical. He fancied himself an artist, performed poetry and music on stage, and allegedly fiddled while Rome burned, though the fiddle didn't exist yet. After being declared a public enemy, Nero committed suicide, famously saying, "What an artist dies in me." With Nero gone and no clear heir, Rome once again plunged into chaos. 69 AD brought us the year of the 4 emperors. This was exactly what it sounds like. 4 emperors in 1 year. Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and finally Vespasian, a general who seized power and founded the Flavian dynasty. Vespasian was a no-nonsense military man. He restored order, paid down debts, and began construction on the Colosseum. His son Titus oversaw the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD, which buried Pompeii and Herculaneum. He was popular, but died young. Then came Domitian, who ruled with an iron fist, built massive projects, and demanded to be called Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. Unsurprisingly, he was assassinated. After Domitian's death, the Senate appointed Nerva, a respected elder statesman. What followed was a rare golden age, a peaceful, stable succession of 5 rulers, each adopting a capable heir rather than passing power to a biological son. The 5 good emperors were Nerva, who served from 96 to 98 AD, a short reign, but definitely set the tone. Trajan, who served from 98 to 117 AD. He was a military genius who expanded Rome to its greatest territorial extent. Hadrian, who served from 117 to 138 AD. He pulled back unsustainable conquests, built Hadrian's Wall in Britain, and travelled across the empire, improving infrastructure. Antoninus Pius was next, serving from 138 to 161 AD, a quiet, prosperous reign with few wars. And lastly, Marcus Aurelius, serving from 161 to 180 AD, a philosopher king, author of Meditations, and the last of the good emperors. Under them, the Roman Empire reached its height. The economy was strong, the borders mostly secure, and Roman culture flourished. At its height, the Roman Empire stretched from the Scottish Highlands to the Persian Gulf, and from the Rhine River to the Sahara. It governed around 60 million people, nearly a quarter of the world's population at the time. Daily life varied greatly depending on your status. Elites lived in large villas, held public office, and sponsored games. Middle-class citizens worked as merchants, artisans, and minor officials. Slaves made up a huge part of the population and worked in homes, farms, and mines, though freedom was possible. Women had more legal and social rights than in any other ancient cultures, though they were still excluded from formal politics. Latin was spoken in the West, Greek in the East. Religion was polytheistic and flexible, with Roman gods often blended with local deities. Infrastructure was world-class. The Romans built roads that had spanned for thousands of miles, aqueducts that supplied fresh water, sewers, public baths, forums, and amphitheaters. Roman law and citizenship created a shared cultural and legal identity, even among diverse peoples. And although literacy was low among the poor, many urban centers had libraries and schools. But trouble was brewing. While the empire looked strong on the surface, there were signs of strain. Succession was always a risk. If no clear heir existed, civil war could erupt. The military was expensive and growing harder to control. The economy depended heavily on conquest and slave labor. Border pressures from Germanic tribes and Parthians were increasing. When Marcus Aurelius died, the empire passed to his son, Commodus, and everything began to unravel. Marcus Aurelius had been the last of the so-called 5 good emperors. His son Commodus, however, did not inherit his philosophical charm. Commodus ruled from 180 to 192 AD, and he fancied himself a gladiator, often fighting in the arena, in highly staged and very safe fights. He renamed Rome after himself, declared himself a living god, and generally treated the empire as his personal playground. Surprisingly, he was eventually assassinated in a palace conspiracy. Imagine being Roman during this time. Emperors rise and fall almost monthly, civil wars erupt constantly, the empire splits into rival pieces, plague, inflation, invasions, the works. Between 235 and 284 AD, over 26 emperors ruled, most of them generals who seized power with military support. Few died peacefully. At the same time, barbarian invasion increased. Germanic tribes, the Sassanid Persians, and others raided deep into the Roman territory. The economy faltered, currency was debased, and famine and disease swept through cities. At one point, the empire literally broke into 3: the Central Roman Empire, the Gallic Empire in the west, and the Palmyrene Empire in the east, led by Queen Zenobia, a remarkable ruler in her own right. Then came Aurelian, one of Rome's most underrated emperors. He reunited the fractured empire, crushed Zenobia's Palmyrene rebellion, defeated the Gallic separatists, and fortified the capital with new massive walls, some of which still stand today. His motto was Restitutor Orbis, restorer of the world. Unfortunately, like many emperors of the time, he was assassinated by his own men. Still, his efforts paved the way for a longer-term solution. In 284, Diocletian took power and said, okay, this is clearly too big for one guy, so he introduced the Tetrarchy, ruled by 4 emperors, 2 senior emperors, Augusti, and 2 junior emperors, Caesares. The idea was to create stability and smoother transitions. Diocletian ruled the east and delegated the west. He also reorganized provinces, revamped the tax system, and attempted economic controls like price fixing, which mostly failed. Crucially, he persecuted Christians heavily, seeing them as disloyal to Roman traditions. But his reign brought temporary order, and remarkably, he retired in 305, the first emperor to voluntarily step down. Unfortunately, his retirement didn't stop another power struggle. Out of the post-Diocletian chaos rose Constantine the Great. In 312, at the Battle of Milvian Bridge, he claimed victory under a Christian symbol, saying he had seen a vision telling him, in this sign, conquer. The next year, he issued the Edict of Milan, legalizing Christianity across the empire. He eventually became sole emperor and moved the capital to a new Rome in the east, Constantinople, or modern-day Istanbul. Christianity, once persecuted, now had imperial backing. Constantine didn't make it the official religion that came later, but he dramatically changed the spiritual direction of Rome. He also stabilized the empire for a time, but cracks in the west were widening. By the late 300s, the Roman Empire had effectively become two empires: the Western Roman Empire, centered in Ravenna and Rome, and the Eastern Roman Empire, centered in Constantinople. While the East had money, cities, and strong defenses, the West was rural, underfunded, and overstretched. To make matters worse, the Western Empire faced mass migrations and invasions by Germanic tribes fleeing the Huns, a new nomadic superpower from the Eurasian steppe. The word barbarian was Roman slang for foreigners, often Germanic peoples like the Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Vandals, Franks, and Alemanni. In 378 AD, the Eastern Emperor Valens was killed at the Battle of Adrianople by the Visigoths, a shock to Roman pride. Soon, the Western Empire was hiring barbarian mercenaries to fight its battles, and those mercenaries were becoming kingmakers. In 410, the unthinkable happened. Rome was sacked by Alaric, king of the Visigoths. It was the first time in 800 years that Rome had fallen to a foreign enemy. The psychological impact was immense. Saint Jerome famously wrote, "If Rome can perish, what can be safe?" The West limped on, but it was a shadow of its former self. Economic decline meant no money for troops. Political instability led to puppet emperors controlled by generals. Military dependence on non-Romans meant loyalty was always uncertain. Cities shrank, trade dwindled, and roads fell into disrepair. Meanwhile, in 455 AD, Rome was sacked again, this time by the Vandals, who looted the city so thoroughly that their name became synonymous with destruction. Finally, in 476 AD, the Germanic general Odoacer deposed the last Western emperor, Romulus Augustus, a teenage figurehead with no real power. No grand battle, no last stand, just a quiet end to what had once been the greatest empire in the West. The Eastern Roman Empire, aka the Byzantine Empire, carried on for nearly another 1,000 years. It preserved Roman law, Greek learning, and Christian theology, and would be a major player in medieval geopolitics. But that's a story for another video. Despite its fall, Rome's legacy lived on. Latin became the root of Romance languages, French, Spanish, Italian, etc. Roman law influenced European legal systems. Roman architecture inspired generations of buildings. The Catholic Church preserved Roman institutions and became a global religion. Rome remained an ideal, copied by medieval kings, tsars, and popes. Even today, we still talk about Rome. Roads, arches, domes, cements, the calendar, numerals, and the Senate, all rooted in Roman innovation. The empire may be gone, but Rome never really left us. The Western Roman Empire officially collapsed in 476 AD, but in a way, Rome never really died. Its influence is everywhere, in our language, our architecture, our laws, and our political systems. It didn't just fade into history, it became history. Rome became the standard for what an empire is supposed to be. Roman law forms the foundation of many modern legal systems. Concepts like innocent until proven guilty, rights to a trial, contracts and property law, all trace their roots back to Roman legal codes. The idea of a republic with a senate, elected officials, and checks and balances heavily influenced thinkers during the Enlightenment and helped shape the founding documents of countries like the United States. So yes, when you hear someone quoting Senator so-and-so, that's Rome speaking 2,000 years later. Rome wasn't just about politics. It was about building things that lasted. Roman concrete was so durable that their aqueducts, domes, and bridges still stand. The Pantheon's dome remains the world's largest unreinforced concrete dome. Roman roads spanned 250,000 miles. Some are still in use today. Aqueducts delivered fresh water over long distances with brilliant engineering. Modern government buildings, banks, museums, and churches often borrow Roman architectural elements, columns, domes, facades, to give a sense of power and permanence. Rome gave us the blueprint for building civilization. When Christianity first appeared in the Roman Empire, it was a fringe movement, then a persecuted one. By the 4th century, it became the state religion. Rome became its launching pad, and Constantinople its eastern stronghold. After the Western Empire's fall, the Catholic Church took on many of the empire's roles: education, administration, record-keeping, and diplomacy. The Pope even claimed the title Pontifex Maximus, once used by Roman emperors. The Church became a spiritual Rome, preserving Latin, Roman thought, and classical traditions through the Dark Ages. While the West crumbled, the Eastern Roman Empire, known to us as the Byzantine Empire, kept the Roman torch burning for nearly 1,000 more years. They spoke Greek, not Latin, and their emperors looked more like Orthodox priests than Roman generals. But in their laws, their bureaucracy, their coins, and their imperial mindset, they were Roman. Their capital, Constantinople, remained the most powerful city in Europe until 1453, when it fell to the Ottomans. That date, nearly a millennium after the fall of Rome, marks the final end of the Roman Empire. During the Middle Ages, everyone wanted to be the next Rome. The Holy Roman Empire, founded by Charlemagne in 800 AD, literally borrowed the name. The Russian Tsars claimed descent from Byzantium, calling Moscow the Third Rome. The Catholic Church saw itself as inheriting Roman authority through St. Peter. Even in the Islamic world, Rome was remembered as a mighty civilization. The Romans, al-Rum, often appear in the Quran. During the Renaissance, European scholars rediscovered ancient Roman texts, sculptures, and ideas. Artists like Michelangelo and Raphael studied Roman ruins, and thinkers like Machiavelli looked back to Roman politics. Later, during the Enlightenment, political theorists were obsessed with Roman republicanism. They saw Rome not just as a model for art and architecture, but for liberty, virtue, and citizenship. The US Capitol was designed to resemble a Roman temple. The founding fathers cited Cicero and Cato. George Washington was compared to Cincinnatus, the Roman farmer who gave up power willingly. And today, Rome is still everywhere, kept alive through movies and TV such as Spartacus, Gladiator, Claudius, and Rome, and also through video games such as Assassin's Creed, Civilization, Caesar III, and also Rome, which I suppose shows that there is something about the rise and fall, the grandeur and the gore, the sandals and the senators that keeps Rome fascinating. It was massive, it was messy, it was brutal and brilliant, and it gave us a story that feels both ancient and modern. Rome wasn't the first empire, and it wasn't the last, but it's the one that defined what empire means. It's combined brute force with deep administration. It's conquered, then assimilated. It's built, it's wrote, it's ruled, and eventually, it's broke. Rome is a mirror, one that shows the possibilities and pitfalls of power. It shows us how a republic can decay into dictatorship, how greatness can overcome overreach, how culture merges, and how ideas endure.